Hello, welcome to your Marist Power Presenting Workshop. I'm Dr. Jennifer Robinette. I've been teaching public presentation skills since 1994, which is a very long time. I came to Marist in 2015 and became public speaking across the curriculum coordinator. And part of that responsibility was developing these power presenting workshops. And I've been pleased to present these to first-year seminar students since 2015, transfer students. We even have workshops for your senior capping classes.
It's one of our goals here at Marist for our students with a liberal arts core to make sure that they know how to communicate effectively. And so it's throughout all of the curricula here at Marist, throughout all the different schools. Even if you're a computer scientist, you need to know how to speak and communicate effectively. Even if you're a biologist, no matter what your area of expertise is, communication is key.
You may have heard the phrase knowledge is power, right? At some point in your life, I'm sure. Well, knowing how to communicate your knowledge to others empowers you. Strong verbal communication skills are always in the top 5 in-demand skills every year that the National Association of Colleges and Employers conducts this survey. Marist is proud to have been on the colleges that create futures list of the Princeton Review. And one of the reasons why we made that list and the reasons why we create futures is because we emphasize important core skills like public presentation skills. And so throughout your career here at Marist, you will encounter public presentation skills at various points. In your first year seminar, in your major, you will take a public presentation intensive course, and then it comes into play again during your capping course. An audience-centered speaker is a speaker who is on target and psychologically in tune with his or her audience. So you see that's a psychology symbol there. You have to really be able to put yourself in the mindset of your audience to develop the best messages that will resonate with them and make sense to lots of different people at the same time. To be audience-centered and tune into your target audience, you need to be able to plan carefully. So to make sense to many different people at the same time, you have to be more careful with the way that you arrange your information. When you're in a one-on-one conversation, you can adjust based on the feedback of the person you're communicating with. When you're speaking to a room full of people, you can't adjust as easily, so you have to plan carefully ahead of time if you want to make sense to lots of different people who, each of them in the room have had many different experiences in their lives, and they have a different base of knowledge about your topic. So planning carefully is an important first part of the power presenting workshops. So part 1 is organized and empowered. Part 2 is about strong delivery skills, and we'll go into that in the second workshop. There's a resource manual on the Power Presenting iLearn workshop site that you can join. It's a joinable website, and you will be a member of that website then for your entire time here at Marist. And it has lots of helpful resources on it, including this resource manual, which is broken down into these same 2 parts. Part 1, organized and empowered. Part 2, strong delivery skills. So first, organized and empowered. You may have seen this analogy before, perhaps in an English class, about a speech is like a Big Mac. You have the top bun, that's your introduction. Any speech that you give, those 4 parts are going to constitute 10 to 20% of your speech. You have to gain attention, establish your credibility, announce your thesis, and then present your preview. The body of your speech, that's the meat of your speech. Any speech that you give, that's going to be 70 to 85% of your speech. So this is where your speech can gain or lose length depending on the amount of time you're supposed to speak for the assignment. So you'll have more or less main points, more or less supporting points. And then the small bottom bun, that's always going to be about 5 to 10% of your speech. You have 2 super important parts, the summary and the closing. The small bottom bun may seem less significant because it's the smallest part of the Big Mac, but it's super important. If you didn't have those, it would fall apart. The whole plan would fall apart, right? The parts in yellow are the parts that guide your audience, the preview, the transitions, and the summary. Those are important for guiding your audience through your speech. The two parts highlighted in red, attention and closing, when those two things work together, they create psychological unity for your audience, which is a sense of wholeness or completion. All right, so the top bun, your introduction. The first thing you have to do is get the attention of your audience. You want to get them interested and engaged with your topic. Introducing yourself, just announcing your name, that's not an attention getter. There are definite attention getting strategies that have been proven to work that we'll talk about in a little bit. Your credibility statement. This is a very important relationship building step. You want to build common ground with your audience at this point. Then there's your thesis, which is different than a thesis for a paper. A thesis for a research paper, for instance, can be much more detailed and intricate and still be really effective. A thesis for a speech needs to do some broad but very important things. It needs to orient your audience to the time and occasion and your topic only. So the simpler and broader a thesis statement for a speech, the better. Then there's your preview, and that's where you introduce your main points. At this point, you're giving your audience a roadmap of your speech. You're telling them what's coming up and what they can expect, and then that helps them follow along when you get into the body of your speech. The number one most important thing that you say and display in your speech is the last thing that you say and display. Your audience is most likely to remember your closing. Your audience is second most likely to remember your attention getter, so the first thing you say and display. And again, when those two things work together, you create psychological unity for your audience.
Why don't you open with a joke?
Open with a joke? It's a university, not a comedy club.
Attention getters. So your options for gaining attention in a speech. Jokes. Try your jokes out, though, on people that you don't know as well. Don't try them out on your family members or your friends because they're more likely to have a similar sense of humor as you. So you want to try them out on classmates that you don't know quite as well to be sure that they are actually funny to lots of different people before you use them in a speech. Quotes are a popular way to get attention. You can arouse curiosity in your audience by asking them a question. They can be rhetorical questions that your audience doesn't have to answer out loud. You can startle your audience with statistics or images, and you can tell a story. The other thing you could do is tell the beginning of a story, but leave off the ending. Save the ending for your closing. You could also, to have an extra strong attention getter, combine more than one of these strategies. So you could ask a question, have a quote, have an image, and a statistic to have super strong attention getter.
So I want to start by offering you a free, no-tech life hack. And all it requires of you is this, that you change your posture for 2 minutes. But before I give it away, I want to ask you to right now do a little audit of your body and what you're doing with your body. So how many of you are sort of making yourselves smaller? Maybe you're hunching, crossing your legs, maybe wrapping your ankles. Sometimes we hold on to our arms like this. Sometimes we spread out. I see you. So I want you to pay attention to what you're doing right now. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes, and I'm hoping that if you sort of learn to tweak this a little bit, it could significantly change the way your life unfolds. So we're really fascinated with body language, and we're particularly interested in other people's body language. You know, we're interested in, like, you know, an awkward interaction or a smile or a contemptuous glance or maybe a very awkward wink or maybe even something like a handshake.
Here they are arriving at number 10 and look at this lucky policeman gets to shake hands with the President of the United States. Oh, and here comes the Prime Minister of it. No.
So a handshake or the lack of a handshake can have us talking for weeks and weeks and weeks, even the BBC and the New York Times.
So what opening strategies did Amy Cuddy use to immediately engage her audience and grab their attention? She asked them to check in with themselves about how they were sitting and their body language. She even turned the camera on them and she showed them themselves in the camera so that they could see how they were sitting. And then she shows a funny video clip to engage them. And she was asking questions, she was showing images of themselves and the funny video clip. Your credibility statement. Your credibility statement might be the easiest part of your speech to develop because it's all about you. You've now gotten your audience's attention, and now it's time to give them a reason to listen to you on the topic. So to do that, you want to talk about your knowledge of the topic, whether it comes from research, training, or education. You want to talk about your interest in the topic and your experience with it. When you talk about your experience with it, you also want to think about experiences that your audience members may have had with your topic and mention those specifically to build common ground with them. So be sure that you point out the things that you may have experienced with your topic that your audience has too. For example, if I was giving a speech about body language, I might say something like, most human beings, like you and me, the words like you are a very effective way to specifically build common ground with your audience. And you can talk about, why we're all curious about the meaning of other people's body language, but how many of us are aware of our own and its impact on us. So then your interest in it. I became interested in body language after I took a special topics class on nonverbal communication. Your experience with it. My final research paper in that class was on body language. Your knowledge of it. Since then, I have done more research on how body language impacts perceptions of public speakers. So this is just an example of the various ways that you could establish your credibility in a credibility statement and build common ground with your audience. Now your thesis statement. On iLearn, the Power Presenting Workshop iLearn Joinable site has worksheets that walk you step by step through the process of building a speech. The top of the worksheet has this heading that you don't say out loud to your audience at all. So the topic is body language in this case. The general purpose of the speech is to inform. The specific purpose is to inform my audience about body language. Well, sometimes the hardest part of starting to write a speech is looking at a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen and not knowing where to start. If you follow the process on the iLearn worksheets, then you will never be staring at a blank screen or sheet of paper not knowing where to start because the steps involved give you the words for the next step. So you can use your specific purpose to give you the wording for your thesis. So I just convert that language into something that makes sense to say to people. And I say for my thesis something like, over the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you what I learned as we unravel some body language mysteries. All right, previewing, the last step of the big top bun of your speech. When you develop a speech, it makes the most sense to develop it from the inside out. So you start with your thesis, develop that first, then you jump down and decide exactly how your main points are going to be worded. Once you know how your main points are worded, then you have all of the words you need to build your preview, to tell your audience what to expect. So, for instance, from the body language example, I take these important keywords like important, influence, and maximize. Those are the words that set each main point apart. And I use those to build my preview. So I say something like, you will learn first why your body language is important, then what influences body language, and finally, how to maximize your body language. Okay, so startling your audience, beginning with a quote, telling a joke, telling a story, arousing curiosity by telling the beginning of a story but leaving off the end, or asking questions. Those are all options for getting attention. All right, statements that are all about you, your experience with, interest in, and knowledge of the topic, where you give the audience a reason to listen to you on the topic, and you build this with them by pointing out shared experiences. Those are credibility statements, and you're building common ground with your audience. The next step in the big top bun is this statement that orients the audience to the time, occasion, and topic of your speech. That's your thesis statement. Finally, the roadmap of the body of your speech that introduces your main points to the audience. That's your preview. Okay, now for the body of your speech. Your body is the meat of your speech. It's going to be made up of transitions with main points and supporting points for each of those main points. Your supporting points are going to include facts, examples, statistics, quotes, and we're going to talk about how you develop each of those. First, writing your main points. Ideally, you want to have 3 main points. We think in 3s. When you go to 4, which one's in the middle? When you lose that position, it makes it harder to remember a list of things. So 3 is always the ideal. However, you can have speeches that have only 2 main points, and you can have speeches that have up to 5 main points. But you don't ever want to have more than 5 main points because that becomes too much and it's confusing to your audience. Your main points should each cover a different area. You want to keep them separate and make sure there's no overlap in the content or the category of main points. Your main point wording should be all yours. You want simple declarative statements of your thoughts only. So there should never be any researched information in your main points. That should all come from you. And then we want to use keywords and parallel wording because those create auditory cues for your audience so that your main points sound the same. It's much more difficult to follow a speech when you're listening to it than something that you're reading. You can't go back and reread it, right? They have to get it the first time. So we want to help them out by making sure our main points are auditory cues for our audience. For example, from our body language speech, you might word your main points this way. Body language is important because it communicates confidence. Body language is influenced by your intrapersonal communication. Body language can be maximized by increasing your self-awareness and practicing power poses. See the parallel wording? You have the same order of words. You have your topic, your verb, the keywords that set each main point apart are highlighted in yellow. And then you can tell what the supporting points are going to be about by the ends of the sentences. Once you figure out how you're going to word your main points, then you got to figure out what order makes the most sense. So basic patterns of organization include things like chronological patterns that are time-based, spatial patterns that are based on direction, topical patterns or categorical patterns. That just means this pattern of organization makes sense for my topic just because of the nature of the topic. Then we have a causal pattern of organization. We say causal because you can talk about cause or effect in either order, and it would make sense. You can talk about the effect of something and back up and talk about the cause of it, or you can talk about the cause and then talk about the effect. Problem solution, you really have to keep those in that order because describing a solution won't make sense until your audience knows what the problem is. So you can use these to have between 2 and 5 main points in any of these different patterns of order, ideally 3. So let's look at some examples. So organizing your main points about a speech about the island of Manhattan. So we know it's broken down into 3 parts: uptown, midtown, downtown. You're giving this speech to an audience that knows nothing about the island of Manhattan. Patterns of organization that you could use include chronological patterns. The island of Manhattan, if you've watched any documentaries, was developed from downtown up, right? So you would simply go downtown, midtown, uptown to describe how the island developed. But most likely, you're going to use a spatial pattern of organization. And as you could still do downtown, midtown, uptown, or you could do uptown, midtown, downtown. What you don't want to do is start at midtown and then jump to downtown and then back to uptown, because that would make no sense to an audience that knows nothing about the island of Manhattan. So if you're going to use a spatial pattern of organization, you start at uptown or you start at downtown and you just go to the next logical part of the island. So either of these, chronological or spatial, would make sense. So Let's say you were going to give a speech about the Flint water crisis. The water in Flint, Michigan was contaminated with lead. Let's say you want to give a speech. Your speech is going to have only 2 main points in it. What patterns of organization could work? Well, you could use the causal pattern of organization. You could talk about what's causing the lead in the water and the effect it's having on the population. Or you could talk about the effects and then back up and explain the causes. Or you could talk about this topic in a problem solution pattern. So you could explain what the problem is and then potential solutions that are being considered. The thing with the problem solution order is there has to at least be some solutions under consideration. Right? Sometimes there are problems that solutions haven't been considered or developed for yet. So then that pattern wouldn't work. If you were giving a speech about lead poisoning and your main points were going to be about the effects of lead poisoning on vision, the central nervous system, hearing, and the mouth, that would be a topical pattern of organization because the main points make sense for the topic of lead poisoning and its effects alone. Those specific main points wouldn't make sense, and that order wouldn't make sense for any other type of speech. Transitions. So once you have written your main points, now you know what order you're going to put them in. Now you have to figure out how to transition between them. This is a very important part of guiding your audience through the body of your speech. Good transitions have 2 parts. There's the signpost that indicates the position in the body of the speech, and then the rest of the sentence is your transition that guides. So, for example, if you were giving a speech about this topic of body language, then a question can be a good way to introduce the main point. So you ask the question, then you answer it. Start off with your signpost. You say, first, why is your body language important? And then your main point answers that. Body language is important because it communicates confidence. Next, what is your body language influenced by? Body language is influenced by your intrapersonal communication. Last, how can your body language be maximized? Body language can be maximized by increasing your self-awareness and practicing power poses. There are these pages in the resource manual, in the organized and empowered part of the resource manual specifically, that have lots of different options for accomplishing those signpost tasks. So if you want to do it in a more complex way, then you can go look at this for some inspiration as to how to do that. Supporting points. You can tell by the wording of the main point, if it's really done well, what is coming up in the supporting point. So the third main point, body language can be maximized by increasing your self-awareness and practicing power poses. So we know the first supporting point is going to be about increasing self-awareness, and the second one is going to be about practicing power poses. And then the sub-supporting points underneath those supporting points explain each of those. So you can use the outline format to keep your information organized. The reason why that's important, the outlining part, is because when you see the relationship of the information to each other, then that makes it much easier to remember when you are actually delivering a speech. The other thing you need to incorporate into your supporting points are verbal citations. You didn't know that information off the top of your head. You had to go find it somewhere. So to keep from plagiarizing, you want to give credit to where the information came from. For example, you might say a New York Times journalist credits Oprah Winfrey with saying this about the impact of confident body language. Now, everyone knows what the New York Times is. Everyone knows who Oprah Winfrey is. But what if your source is less well known, which will most likely be the case for your sources that you use in speeches? Then you need to explain a little bit about why this source knows something about this topic. So you would say something like, Dr. Mark Knapp, a University of Texas professor with a global reputation for his research on nonverbal communication, said. Or, according to a recent Fortune magazine article, the body language of all Fortune 500 CEOs has one thing in common. Everyone's probably heard of Fortune magazine, but my guess is you haven't gotten the most recent issue of Strategies and Tactics. So that would require a little bit of explanation to be cited verbally in an effective way. A recent article in Strategies and Tactics, a publication of America's top PR industry association, stated that. Okay, so these point out position and guide your audience through the body of your speech. Signposts point out position. Transitions guide your audience. In this part of the meat of your speech or the body of your speech, you use keywords and parallel wording to create auditory cues for your audience. That would be in the main points of the body of your speech. You want to work verbal citations into the wording of the parts that have your facts, examples, statistics, and quotes. That would be your supporting points. Okay, now for the small bottom bun, your conclusion. Those two super important parts of your speech. In the summary, you signal the end of your speech. Once you signal the end and that it's about to be wrapped up, when you say in conclusion or to sum up today, you immediately get your audience's attention back. So you signal the end and then just briefly recap your main points. Don't go into detail. And then your closing, your main tasks are to remind your audience of your attention getter and leave an impression on them about your topic, creating that psychological unity by reminding them of your attention getter in the process, right?
L. L stands for loyalty. That's what Grace Adler is all about. E. E stands for no more smells in the elevator. R. Responsibility. So in conclusion,
Arthur, wake up, she's concluding.
pick a winner. Pick change. Pick me.
Summarizing effectively. Once you've written your preview, now you have all of the words you need to write your summary. In iLearn, the worksheets take you through this process of writing your main points. Then you use all of those words to develop your preview. And then right after you develop your preview, you have all the words to develop your summary. So that's the next thing you develop. So you're actually jumping around from the body to the introduction to the conclusion when writing a good speech. So for example, you would say, in conclusion, now you know why your body language is important, what influences it, and how to maximize it. Remember that the number one most important thing that you say is going to be your closing. I know all of us have seen tons of presentations by this point in our lives, right? You've probably seen presentations end with one or both of these types of slides. One that says any questions in giant letters behind someone's head, or one that says thank you in giant letters behind someone's head. Now this is the CEO of Apple with thank you in giant letters behind his head. So can you tell what his speech was about? We don't know. We don't know what he was introducing at this particular presentation. A really good closing visual and closing will remind your audience of what your topic is. So never ever have any questions or thank you in giant letters behind your head. You're wasting your final opportunity to leave an impression on your audience about your topic. Options for closing your speech. You could tell the end of the story that you began in your attention getter. You can also use a quote. That's a popular way for wrapping up a speech. You can answer questions that you asked in your attention getter. You can also go back to using startling statistics and images to close a speech. And then in addition to all of those that relate directly to what you did to open your speech and the options and strategies for gaining attention, we have one additional strategy for closing, and that could be a call to action. Usually those are used in persuasive speeches. Whatever you choose to do, make sure it's meaningful, it's memorable, and it makes an impact on your audience.
The last thing I want to leave you with is this. Tiny tweaks can lead to big changes. So this is 2 minutes. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Before you go into the next stressful evaluative situation, for 2 minutes, try doing this in the elevator, in a bathroom stall, at your desk behind closed doors. That's what you want to do. Configure your brain to cope the best in that situation. Get your testosterone up, get your cortisol down. Don't leave that situation feeling like, oh, I didn't show them who I am. Leave that situation feeling like, oh, I really feel like I got to say who I am and show who I am. So I want to ask you first, both to try power posing, and also I want to ask you to share this science, because this is simple. I don't have ego involved in this. Give it away, like share it with people, because the people who can use it the most are the ones with no resources and no technology and no status and no power. Give it to them because they can do it in private. They need their bodies, privacy, and 2 minutes, and it can significantly change the outcomes of their life. Thank you.
What closing strategies did Amy Cuddy use to leave a meaningful, memorable impact on her audience? So she has the image of Wonder Woman, which she needs to update her Wonder Woman to Gal Gadot. But other than that, still you could see the power pose. And she asked them to share this science with others. So pass on their new knowledge. So that was a call to action. All right, so these are really easy, right? What briefly recaps your main points? A summary. And then telling the end of a story that you began in your attention getter, ending with a quote, a powerful image or statistic, inspiring or challenging your audience to action, or answering questions you asked in your attention getter. Those are all options for meaningful, memorable closings with impact. And then if these two things work together, they should be developed together in the first place to create psychological unity. Attention getters and closings, right? And this is just an example of the worksheets that are available on iLearn, and they take you through the process of writing a speech from the inside out. There are also checklists and examples available on the iLearn Power Presenting Workshop joinable site. So this flow chart visualizes the process of writing a speech from the inside out, starting with your thesis and your introduction, jumping down to the body to develop your main points and how you're going to transition between them, jumping back to the introduction to develop your preview, then down to your conclusion to develop your summary. Then you want to develop your attention getter and your closing to work together, so you develop those at the same time. And you're probably not in a position to write a really good attention getter and closing until you've developed the rest of the parts of your speech. So you want to do that as your fourth step. Then you can go back and put in your credibility, which probably will be the easiest part to develop anyway. And then the last thing you can do is go back to fill in the support underneath each of your main points. So you pull out your research and put it under each of your main points. Okay, so we talked about being organized and empowered and audience-centered. We talked about attention getters and closings, and getting those to work together to create psychological unity for your audience. We talked about establishing your credibility and common ground with the audience, and we talked about previewing and summarizing. This is an example of what a great Q&A or question and answer slide would look like. Most of the time, people just put any questions in giant letters behind their head. That doesn't do anything to help your audience generate questions about what you've just shown them and presented to them. A slide like this reminds them of the things that you've just covered and hopefully helps them generate questions for you.